Welcome to Real Estate Investing Abundance, the show for busy, fulfilled professionals like you to learn how to develop financial independence built on solid, passive real estate investments. Now, here is your host, Dr. Alan Lomax.
Hello, enlightened investors, and welcome back to Real Estate Investing Abundance. I'm your host, Dr. Alan, and as always, it's a delight to have you with us. Thank you for being with us again. For today's episode, we are going to be visiting with Chip Fisher, and we're going to be departing a bit from our normal type of guest today, and we'll tell you a little bit what that is as we go into the show. Chip is a very experienced executive with a demonstrated history of working in the medical device industry. He is a strong business development professional skilled in negotiations, business planning, coaching, medical devices, and entrepreneurship. Recently, he started a niche life consultancy practice working with Nextgens, who've inherited wealth and are trying to understand the philosophical principles of this privilege and the responsibility. So welcome, Chip, and take us into the show and share a memorable experience from your formative years that may have helped you to be who you are today.
Thanks, Alan. Great to be on the show. Thank you for having me. So I would say that my most formidable experience as a young man was really spending time with my father, who was 50 when I was born, and really understanding sort of the course of empire and his business. He owned a large electronics business back from 1937 to 1969. And so I got a lot of education at the dinner table and was very much, I was the last child of three. I was the youngest, obviously, and there was a great age gap. So there was no sense of kind of competition. It was almost like having a grandfather, but he was my dad. And he went into great detail about his business and his life and his experiences, and spoken very openly at a time when he felt very confident and was sort of at, quote unquote, height of empire in his life and his career. And so that was really, I would say, the most formidable experience of my life was having a very deep relationship with him.
Wow, that would be phenomenal. A dad, a granddad, and a mentor all in one.
All rolled into one.
Yeah. Well, Chip, we're glad to have you with us, and we'll give you a moment here to tell us just a little bit about this new endeavor that you have undertaken, because I think our audience needs to understand that before we actually get into the questions actually pertaining to that. So tell us about your new consultancy.
Sure. Well, I started Ursus Advisory, which is the name of the consulting practice, but it's really, I'm the principal and the only person who's really doing the consulting at this time. And I started this a year ago. I've been thinking about it for many years. And basically, I work with high net worth Nextgens primarily, although I will work with people sort of who are over 40, but primarily 22 to 40, to examine and understand and discuss the various aspects of wealth and different topic areas that I think that I've thought about over the years and I had problems with when I was younger, and in a way that really gives them a sense, an overall sense of all of the things that they face and or will be facing in their formative years as they become, real people in the sense of, being adults, making big decisions, career, family, partner, recreation, friends, etc. And so these are sort of, I refer to them as the spokes on the wheel. And basically, they're as follows. It's very simple. There are 5 or 6 categories, and I'll tell you what they are. How to understand and appreciate the origin of your family's wealth and the unique challenges posed by its creation. What does that mean? Essentially, you have to take an historical look at your family, the people who made the wealth or are guardians of the wealth. If you are not G2, you're G3, 4, 5, whatever, and try to really trace it back and understand all of the relationships as much as you, and gather as much information as you can, which will give you a narrative and a perspective on the money, its creation, and its maintenance over time. What you think you'd like to do in life, how to pursue directions within the confines of your best skills, I'm not a career counselor per se, but I'm very good at helping people, my clients, avoid bad decisions. When I was 27, I was very interested in the food business, and I went out and I established a retail food business, which was successful, and I kept it going for about 23 years. But it was a painful process. I was way out of my comfort zone, which was a good thing in a way. It was very good schooling as a business exercise, but it was tough. And in retrospect, I probably shouldn't have done it. I did it, and that's past history. But the bottom line is, it's good to really understand what your skill sets are and what you should and shouldn't avoid. Friends, partners, and how they relate to you and you to them vis-a-vis your wealth and how it affects your relationship with them. Really understanding how your position in the world as a person with money affects how people perceive you, and who you can trust, who you can't trust. Being trusting versus not being trusting in interpersonal relationships is a very important thing. And I think it's not something that's spoken about in great depth. But from my experience, I think it needs to be spoken about. And I'm the person who can do it very well. Choosing a life partner based upon the presence of wealth, understanding the need for someone who can comprehend this responsibility. You have to really take kind of a dynastic approach, quote unquote, to having a partner who can really be a partner and not someone who comes into the relationship who's at all resentful of your background, of your experience, and can help you and help balance you with their own skills to enhance your life rather than become someone with whom you're in conflict as a result of the money and other things. But money does create friction, and it does create problems. And one should be aware of that as one searches. Parents and siblings and your relationships with them and how their perspectives about wealth may differ from your own, and why that distinction is important. Your siblings may have a very different perspective of wealth than you do, about how to live, even if the money's equal, and usually it is, how they're going to live their lives and why their perspective may be different from yours. I had two older sisters. Their perspectives are very different, not better or worse. They're just different. And so you really have to examine these interpersonal relationships within your nuclear family as well. The same thing is true about your parents, and understanding their perspective and how to be respectful, but also live your own life. And the last category, which I think is, to me at least, the most important emotionally, is the importance of hobbies and interests, clubs and associations, and the meaning of third places, how to become a full person and gain breadth and perspectives. I think one of the problems that I see today with a lot of Nextgens, though not all, is that they are distracted by technology. They're very focused on individual activity, and they don't have they don't perceive the need to be with other people as often or in as structured a manner as my generation did. I think interpersonal activity is absolutely essential at any generation, because that's what we've done biologically in an historical manner. And so just the changes of the last 10 years have changed people's behavior. And it's quite a detriment to them, and as it is to people of older generations as well, and younger than the next gen generation. So the importance of getting out, doing things, being with other people, developing your interests and hobbies, and have that. You shouldn't see it as work, but you should see it as part of the structure of life. That is absolutely essential. So I work very, very hard to try to understand what people really like, and truly make them understand the importance of this. And then we get into other topics about, lifestyle, how to spend money, why you spend money, why you don't spend money, why you should save it, or whatever. And without imposing any of my values on a client, I use examples that I've seen in other situations to understand, in the presence of wealth, and especially in the presence of great wealth, what money means and what it can do and what it can't. And so those are basically the key points that I focus on. And it's really about in essence, it's about how to rule your wealth rather than having it rule you. So if you have a command over all of these subjects and you've discussed them in detail, and most of my clients have been working with me between 3 and 9 months. I think of this as sort of a 6 to 9 or 12 month project. in terms of consulting. Some may stay on longer. I have a number of clients who are interested in meeting after, let's say, 9 months to a year on a less frequent basis. But it's a continuing narrative, and it's fascinating to me, and it's enjoyable for me to work with my clients and really to help them in a way that I wasn't able to find anybody to talk to in this kind of a peer manner when I was younger.
A lot to unpack there, but just to clarify, I don't think we really stated here, but Chip, you inherited wealth at a young age. I can't remember if it was in your teens or just your early 30s.
21.
21. Okay. And so you have a life experience to be able to share with others who are inheriting this. And much of what you have pulled together are from those life experiences. You said you had been thinking about putting the advisory consultancy firm together for quite some time. What was it that finally motivated you to pull it together?
Well, I've been the chairman, and I remain the chairman of my main company, which is a medical device business. We make a device that treats depression, anxiety, and insomnia. I have my partner is CEO. I've been easing off in terms of my responsibilities over the course of the last 2 or 3 years as the company's grown and my role has diminished. I remain engaged. It's something I'm very interested in. And one of the reasons I did this is because I've spent the last 17 years in the mental health space, not as a professional practitioner, but as someone who has studied the subject, depression, anxiety, insomnia, other related disorders. And we work with over 10,000 practitioners in our company who have been involved in the use of the device. So I've gotten a very interesting perspective on mental health, which is part of this whole discussion, of course, in a way. And I don't bill myself as a professional practitioner. I'm a life consultant, and I don't think that I feel that my personal background and my personal experience is enough to create a narrative. But this all came out as a result of this. I'm also involved with an organization that I'm a trustee of an organization that I was a member of at college. And I have a lot of conversations especially with Nextgens, about some of them have come from money. And I've just sort of had casual conversations about this and helped them sort of tangentially. And so this really sort of grew into a practice that way. And it's been very rewarding to have friends recommend clients and to have them come sort of out of the blue from friends and wealth managers and other sources.
Yeah. Well, as you were talking about the 5 different principles, a lot of questions came to mind, but one in particular was the first principle that you talk about, and that is that it's important for inheritors to understand the family history and how wealth has been treated through that history and where that history or where that wealth originated from. From the experiences that you have gone through, what is important about knowing that history?
Well, primarily it's understanding the struggle that occurred to make the money. Who struggled, who put in the greatest amount of time, and how did that struggle affect other people? For example, in my own experience, I've had, in terms of my father's experience as a businessman, he was basically did everything himself. He started with $365, built what became the equivalent of, say, $100 million company today, and it was financed over time. And so the importance of understanding that is to understand whether you individually were a part of that struggle, especially if you're G2. What was involved in making the money, who made the sacrifice, and how did their emotional makeup, if you were very close to them, affect either if you're G3, either your parents or you directly. I felt like I was very much a part of the wealth building narrative because I was there when my father was trying to, build his company and then sell it.
So what if you find in that family history that wealth was developed on perhaps not what you might consider to be ethical ways and means?
Well, I mean, that's an interesting question. I think that there's not much you can do about it. I think that it's not your cross to bear, and you have to really determine whether the making of that money means that you then have to, so quote unquote, reverse that process and then give a lot of the money away. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that without great thought. But there are situations where someone does feel guilty and does understand that this legacy is not the best legacy that could possibly exist. In my case, I'm very lucky because my father was manufactured audio equipment. People derived great pleasure from it. He also made a lot of money doing it. And so he actually was very lucky to come across a business where he could make money, be an honest businessman, and work hard and do well. And I think it was sort of an American dream situation. And maybe that's a little bit more rare than most people realize. But if it is an unethical situation, then it requires discussion and thought as to how one approaches that and whether that's something you need to unravel. I know that the Rockefellers, for example, have put a lot of money into the environment because there was a lot of pollution caused by the generation of their original wealth. And many of them feel guilty about it.
Enlightened investors, if you haven't done so already, be sure and click that like button and also click that share so others can take advantage of the content. And finally, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single one of our upcoming episodes. There's probably a lot of examples of that, of third and fourth generations who have certainly aware of where their wealth came from and have made some major contributions in a number of different ways. I won't name any of those families, but many of them are quite prominent in the United States. Can you share a memorable experience or a success story from your consultancy work, not giving any names, but how is it that you have been able to help a young inheritor who was actually dealing with all 5 or 6 of these different principles that you have been spelled out for us?
Sure. Well, the person that I've been working with the longest, which is close to a year, was someone who was confused about all of these topics. And we sort of had to go through them one by one so that it didn't feel overwhelming. And we sort of conquered each of those 5 different or 6 different key topic areas and saw them as units. And then eventually we tied them all together. I think that's really the process that I work on. It doesn't mean that I don't skip around from topic to topic occasionally, but focusing in on something and really solving it and understanding the narrative of that particular key problem is more important than trying to, take a shotgun approach and go wide on the subject. That is really, I think that's the easiest way to create success here. And in the case of my oldest client, that has actually come about. It's come about from being able to open up about these different things, over time, to be able to have sort of consistent conversations and to give thought to each of these topics in between sessions. I think that's, it sounds obvious, but it's not. I mean, you really, because if you don't have someone with these topics who's had a similar experience, then you may be speaking to a mental health professional who has, certain very key skills, but doesn't have the personal experience that I do. So I don't pretend to be a mental health professional. I'm not classically trained. That's not why someone's coming to me. They're coming to me because I have a peer narrative and a peer understanding of all of these things that we talk about. I don't pretend that my experience is going to mirror theirs, but it does form the structure for analysis and conversation from which their own family situation or their own personal situation can evolve. And so that's the key thing. The success comes from a client wanting to do the work, wanting to do this type of work, and wanting to do it over a reasonable period of time. I'm much more interested in getting somebody launched in a reasonable period of time than to, say, retain them over 3 or 4 or 5 years, where it's just a consistent life narrative. That is valuable, but it's not what I do. I really go after these key topics because I think this is what forms the structure of one's emotional strength, and it allows you to deal with the subject of wealth over time and to make good choices.
Well, all of these areas are important life areas for anybody, whether they have inherited wealth or whether they are just an average middle-class individual. But I can certainly see the complexities of adding wealth to each one of these experiences. And I can see that really from any one of these perspectives, if friends and partners and relationships are not functioning well, whether you have wealth or you don't have wealth, it's going to be problematic for your life. But if you have wealth and you're having trouble with any of these issues, it is going to be, I think, a major challenge in how to deal with those issues, plus dealing with that responsibility of handling that wealth in a responsible way. Any one of those that could be dysfunctional. You take number 3, the life partner. That's so critical to any healthy individual's life, is a supportive and understanding partner. But with the wealth layered on top of that, certainly initiating that life partner relationship is going to have that challenge of, first of all, is this person interested in me, or are they interested in my money? And if you get through that challenge, then you're going to have a lot of differences in terms of how to utilize that wealth. And that is going to bring up an innumerable amount of conflicts, I would expect.
Yes,
So,
that's right. I mean, people are, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, go ahead, if you could just expound on that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that means you have to do one of two things. You either have to marry someone who's not from a wealthy background, but really understands what you're all about and what your family's about, and they accept the challenge of the problems that come from a moneyed family, whether it's G1 or G2, because there are problems. It's a different set of problems than someone who comes from, say, a middle class or a lower class background. Everybody's got problems and everybody has challenges, but they're dealt with differently depending upon your level of financial comfort. And so that requires a lot of conversation and a lot of understanding of where someone's from. I was very analytical about whom I wanted to marry. I had two challenges. One was I wanted to live in the New York metropolitan area. So I wanted to find someone who was willing to do that. That was my choice. And the second was I married within my faith, which I'm Jewish. And so I wanted to marry within my faith. So that was another thing. That was another check mark. The third was they had to be able to deal with my family and their fame, which was not inconsiderable. And the fourth was they had to understand the narrative of money. And I didn't set out to marry someone of wealth, but I ended up doing that, although my wife and I are on a different plane in that category. But the point is, she came from a moneyed family, so she understood the narrative already. You know, the zeros can be different, but the point is, when you understand that legacy of inheritance, then you have a leg up on someone who doesn't. That doesn't mean you're better. It just means you're different. And that can be very helpful. It's not always helpful, but it often is helpful that someone understands your background, the kind of things that you struggled with. And so there are fewer problems to discuss, or there are fewer topics that will cause conflict. I think that's what you have to do. So I took, just to be purely honest, I mean, I love my wife. I was very attracted to her, obviously all the classic things, but I took a very dynastic approach towards union, and she did as well. And so I found someone who was more akin to understanding the dynastic nature of partnership that existed, let's say, for World War II or World War I, when marriages were arranged or people married within their social circle. It wasn't a bad thing to do. Now one has an enormous amount of choice in terms of color and religion and background and country, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And everybody wants to be open to all of these things. That's all fine. The problem is, at the end of the day, you're more comfortable being with someone who really, truly understands what you have been through and are going through and will go through with relation to the topic of money over time. And I think that that's an essential component in the conversation. It doesn't mean you have to do X or Y. It means you have to understand that narrative and embrace it.
Definitely a challenge for anyone, but I think certainly for someone who is coming into wealth. So many more questions I would like to get to, but we are running out of time here. For those who would like to get more information, where can they go to get in touch with you to get that information?
Sure. It's ursusadvisory.com. That's my website, although it's just a landing page. So the best place is ursusadvisory@gmail.com. And that is will lead you to me personally, and I will send you a précis of the work and the list of topics that I discussed on the podcast. And I do a consultation with anyone who's interested in the topic at no charge. And I enjoy doing that to see if we're of like mind, and then an engagement would start after that.
Well, before we go into our last set of questions, what advice would you give to individuals who have developed their wealth or who are developing their wealth rather than having inherited their wealth? And they are also navigating these philosophically complex questions. What advice would you give to them?
Well, I do. As it turns out, I do have a client who is in a little bit older than my general range, who's about 45 or 50 right now, who is considering all of these things and coming to me to ask these very questions. So I'm well versed in that conversation level as well. I would say that is a parent of teenagers who are about to come of age and inherit a great deal of money. I think that they have to have that same kind of conversation themselves about their own background and their own values and what's important to them, and how to impart those values to their children and get them to understand the meaning of money, how hard it is to make it without, crushing their spirit. And the two things, I'll give you two comments that my father made to me, which are two of the most profound things that he ever said to me. In fact, they are the two most profound things. One was, he said, I wouldn't want to be in your shoes being my son with my wealth and my fame. You have an enormous challenge ahead of you. And I don't envy you that. I envy you that you won't have my financial struggle, but you were certainly trying to fill very big shoes. And I don't envy you for that. And he said it in a very caring way. He also said to me, you will never understand until you run your own businesses as I have and struggle as I have, which I have at this point, how hard it was for me to make the kind of money that I'm passing on to you. You will not have an understanding of that until you try to do it yourself. So my suggestion is, don't act like this is going to come around. This is a once in a lifetime event. And you should be very careful with how you live and how you spend money, and to live within your means. And I trust that you will do that. I trust that you have that good judgment. So I was very impressed that he said that to me when I was 21 years old, and I took that to heart and have always kept that in mind as I've lived my life.
Well, let's go into our last four questions. And the first one is, share with us one of your most difficult challenges in life. How'd you come through that, and what was the major lesson from that?
Well, I think the greatest challenge was really my first business, Alan, where I was sort of, interested in the topic area, but not really understanding how difficult it would be to execute. And that was running a retail food business in New York in the 1980s. Way out of my comfort zone. I stuck it out, though. I wanted to make it work. And that was probably the greatest challenge I've ever had, personally, I think. It's an extraordinarily hard business area. And I chose something, brutal. I didn't do it to torture myself, but I ended up being tortured. And so I would say that that was the greatest learning experience of my life, and certainly the greatest challenge.
Well, share with us 3 good things from the last 24 hours that you have experienced.
Well, I read a great book. I'm reading a book about Captain Cook and his third voyage by Hampton Sides, who's a noted author whose books I've read before, mostly Tales of the Sea. I got to see my youngest son, who lives in San Francisco, and his wife. They were there for the weekend and just left this morning, but I had a wonderful time with him and a wonderful ending evening. And I also spent yesterday with a very close friend who is unfortunately has terminal cancer, but we have made it a point, no matter what his mood or what his situation, to meet once a week until he passes. We both insist on it, and it's a struggle for him. It's a struggle for me emotionally, but certainly my struggle pales in comparison to his. But we've really enjoyed this time together, and I think it just becomes more and more satisfying over time. And it's actually, I think, in a way, along with the love of his children, kept him alive a little bit longer.
Well, outside of your consultancy, how are you putting your wealth to work to create universal well-being?
Well, I mean, the biggest project really is in the mental health field. I invested in a technology 17 years ago, which is basically a handheld home use device that treats depression, anxiety, and insomnia. We are wending our way through the FDA process, even though it's been on the market for a long time, but there's sort of another layer of approval that we need. And we've been marketing it in the United States and Europe successfully for the last 17 years. It's been on the market for 40. And it's very rewarding to be able to work on a technology that can be both accessible and usable safely for a very large part of the population. So we're looking at a global initiative to help treat what the World Health Organization feels is the greatest health challenge in history, and greater now than ever, given the way the world is going.
Yeah. Well, our last question is, imagine you've come to the end of your life and you're lay on your deathbed. What do you look back on with your greatest sense of joy and fulfillment?
Well, the greatest sense of joy is my family, my wife, and my kids. And the second, I would say, behind that, and not very close second, is the friends I've made. I think friendship and the way that you deal with appreciating close friends and keeping them in the picture over time, over long, long periods of time, is a very key asset. And I think that's something. Some people do it well, some people don't. They feel they have to kind of move away from the past. I don't feel that way. I feel that looking back at the past, not in a wistful way, but in an observational way, is important for everyone. And so I would say that my relationships are sacrosanct. And those are the things that have kept me along. And if you look at the happiness project that's been going on at Harvard, that's one of the key elements, is really having interpersonal connections and spending time with people, and doing that on a regular basis, and doing it well with meaning.
Well, Chip, it has been an absolute delight. Could continue this conversation, I'm sure, for another hour or two. Thank you for being with us. And enlightened investors, thank you for joining us once again today. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe, and head over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a rating and a review. Until next time, live abundantly. Enlightened investors, wait, don't go just yet. I just want to remind you about our recently launched webinar that you will not want to miss. If you're at all curious and would like to learn more about how real estate investing can diversify your investment portfolio, alleviate the anxiety associated with Wall Street swings, leverage your 401ks and IRAs to substantially increase the return on your investment, and do all of this with turnkey, hands-off, passive real estate investments, then you'll want to immediately go to stevetalker.com/webinar. In the webinar, we'll also address the common dubious investment schemes that you want to avoid. To access the webinar, go to stevetalker.com/webinar. I look forward to seeing you in the webinar.
Thank you for tuning in to Real Estate Investing Abundance, brought to you by Steve Talker Capital, a company working for passionate professionals like you to develop financial independence built on solid, passive real estate investments. As part of our efforts to make the world a better place, Steve Talker Capital contributes to activities and organizations committed to better understand the equine. These endeavors attempt to enhance the human treatment of horses worldwide. Steve Talker Capital, working for a world where all creatures, great and small, flourish abundantly. For resources to develop your financial independence, connect with us at stevetalker.com.